Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this, the 35th Digital Marketing Masterclass webinar of 2020. My name is Karen Cahill, and I'm going to be your host. Scott Lawrence and Edmund Jabara are also on the line to talk about the keys to a great social media campaign.
Hey there.
Hey there.
And as always, I encourage everyone to submit any questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat window. We may not get to all the questions during the webinar, but as long as you put your questions in the Q&A box, we can save them to answer later.
Okay, we'll also provide an email at the back end of this for additional questions you might think of after this Facebook webinar is over.
And at the front end of this, we think we should tell everyone a little bit about who we are. So RMI is a digital marketing agency with a special focus on health, fitness, and healthcare related organizations. Scott's going to get into a little more detail later on about who we are and what we're going to be doing during the halftime break.
And before we move on to from the title slide, I want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that the name of this webinar is The Keys to a Great Paid Social Media Campaign. But Scott, you just referred to it as a Facebook webinar.
Well, we started out with the intention of talking more broadly about all social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram, the others. But I think, or at least I hope, our repeat attendees listening in today would attest that we always want to share really meaningful content in our webinars, without a lot of fluff. And in order to do that and show actual practical steps, we really needed to focus in on one platform. And it was obvious to us that Facebook should be that platform because they are by far the biggest player in the space.
Okay, so we'll get into more detail about that in a couple of slides, but first let's go over today's agenda. And here's what we're going to talk about today. So for those who have attended other webinars we've done, this format is probably pretty familiar. Generally speaking, we like to start by sharing some research and data analysis. Then we're going to go into detail about what these trends seem to indicate. And then we talk about how to make it actionable, how to actually use it. In this webinar, we're going to start with the basics and quickly ramp up to what most people probably wouldn't consider basic, as you'll see toward the end of the webinar.
And we'll also have the RMI commercial break, or what Edmund just referred to as the halftime break, where I'll tell you a little bit of ourselves. It's a pretty short intermission. I just like to tell everyone what we do in case you're ever looking for help with digital marketing.
And the last thing, so we always try to gamify our webinars and keep everyone engaged. So we've inserted little fun trivia questions along the way. So we have the ability to drop a little interactive survey question onto your screen. I just want to encourage everyone to please participate in these. The trivia questions are totally anonymous and they're a lot of fun when everyone participates.
Okay, let's get into it. So let's talk about why we called this a Facebook webinar. Here's a graph from the Pew Research Center tracking the popularity of social media platforms for adults across the US. Notice we removed Facebook and YouTube from this chart. And this is where we thought it would be fun to throw in our first fun trivia question of the day. May feel a little like deja vu for anyone who attended our YouTube webinar, because we did recycle the chart from that webinar, because obviously it makes sense for both Facebook and YouTube webinars.
Well, we don't have any prizes to give out, so I guess it's okay if some people came into this webinar with the answers ahead of time. We like to add these questions to the mix because we think it's a fun way to test our knowledge and, maybe learn something new. And like I said before, it's totally anonymous, so there's really no reason not to answer the questions that come up on your screen right now. Here's the question. Is YouTube more popular or less popular than Facebook? We'll unhide those two components on the graph as soon as everyone's answered.
Okay, and the answers are coming in now. We're just going to give another few seconds. Appreciate everybody playing because it makes it more fun. And we'll give you 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. We had 76% answer, and it looks like 40% said that YouTube is more popular, and Facebook. 60% said that Facebook is more popular.
So it looks like YouTube had a slight edge over Facebook for the last couple of years.
Right. For some reason, Pew Research started tracking YouTube with social media platforms in 2018, although I think most of us don't really consider YouTube to actually be an example of social media.
One other point is that this metric really only tracks the percentage of people who use these platforms, but it doesn't tell us how much time people are spending on these platforms each day.
And said another way, Instagram, which by the way is also owned by Facebook, has been growing pretty steadily, but still has about half the market share of Facebook. And that's an important metric. But what if Instagram's audience is viewing those posts 3 times as long? In other words, what if people on Facebook are there for 30 minutes a day, but the people using Instagram are on there for, say, an hour and a half every day?
And that's a setup that we needed for the next slide.
Right. And the reality is that a lot of people are using Twitter, but they're not spending a lot of time on it. And Instagram has gotten much more popular, but the amount of time people are spending on it isn't even half of the time they spend on Facebook. And you can also see YouTube here and Snapchat and Instagram. People spend more time on Facebook than even YouTube.
So Facebook is the winner for both number of users and amount of time spent using them. And that's the primary reason for why in this webinar on paid social media platforms, we're focusing in on Facebook. So we've talked about this in many webinars that we present, this idea that you have to first understand who you should target, because different customers like to purchase in different ways. So we ask, what do your best customers look like? How do they prefer to buy? And what message resonates most with each of those targets?
And what we mean by know your audience is that it takes a bit of research to figure out who are most likely to buy from you and who's the best customer. So we'll first talk about how people have said that they prefer to buy particular types of products. And then we'll talk about how to pull out the demographics like age and income, that sort of thing. So we had to choose one industry to focus on today. For this webinar, we chose the furniture industry. Even though RMI is more focused typically on health and healthy related industries, we have actually worked with furniture groups in the past. But we chose that industry just to show how ubiquitous these marketing principles should be.
Okay, so onto the research segment. And we're going to build a graph here on the page, starting at the bottom of the page. We surveyed people and asked them how they preferred to purchase different types of products, from sofas to swimwear to organic foods. The first product type at the bottom are things you might purchase if you're a runner or just like to jog. And it appears that nearly 40% say they'd prefer to buy that stuff online, and more than 50% would prefer to purchase in person in the physical store. So that's how to read the graph.
And that hybrid group are those people who want to do both, like see it online first, then buy it in person. So about 10% said they'd like to see jogging wearables online, then buy it in person. But I should mention the caveat here, and that is when we asked this question a few months ago, it was after the pandemic hit, but we asked how people preferred to purchase with that caveat that the pandemic comes to an end and there's more freedom to move about as they like.
Okay, well, at any rate, now that we know how to read the chart, let's look at a couple more. Scott, in a webinar that we held on marketing to healthy food advocates, you mentioned that it's interesting that organic foods and dietary supplements were such different products, but that the people who bought them were actually usually the same people. Those people just preferred to buy the products differently, despite the fact that organic foods and dietary supplements are often located very near to one another in a grocery store.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it makes sense too. Many people may prefer to actually feel how ripe their organic tomatoes are, of course. But I think it underscores the point that you really should always segment your best customers into small groups so that you can market to them more efficiently. For instance, Home Depot targets people both at the local level as well as the national level because 60% of their online purchases are picked up at the local store. That's up 50% from 4 years ago. And there are very different strategies for marketing products locally versus nationally. But that's a different webinar. In fact, we just talked about the difference between those two digital marketing models 2 weeks ago in our webinar on online buying as a revolution. as a result of the pandemic, how much things have changed as a result, starting of March this year with the pandemic.
Right. And if anyone would like a recording of that webinar, just let us know. But to bring us back to this webinar on Facebook, I think this chart is pretty easy to read once you understand how to read it. So let's see all of the product types now. So I suppose the point to take away from this, especially if you're selling products that aren't any of these types, is that you should know the purchase preference of your customers, ideally at a product level.
Yeah, and before we move on, I should say that in today's webinar, similar to our webinar on YouTube, we needed to choose one of these two models, selling locally or selling nationally. So we chose to talk about how to sell products at the local level.
And to drive that point home, next we're going to focus more intently on people who might buy these two items right here at the top of the list. These are the people who buy furniture. And I'd ask you to notice that the majority of people buying furniture, at least these two furniture related items, would prefer to buy them in store as opposed to buying them online. And again, similar to the YouTube webinar, we're going to cover research on furniture in order to set up a faux Facebook campaign to sell at the local level.
And as Karen just pointed out from the chart just now, the majority of people seem to want to buy furniture from brick and mortar stores. So we asked them how far they'd be willing to travel to the furniture store. Because if you sell at the local level, you should know how far away from your store you should advertise.
Right, that's a good clarification. So we asked people how far they were willing to travel for furniture that costs at least $200. And you can see that about 3 out of 5 people are not willing to travel more than 30 minutes to purchase $200 worth of furniture.
Right, but what's most important here is to understand the demographics of each. So for instance, we can look specifically at the gender of each of these groupings.
Fewer males say they're willing to travel a further amount of time to look at and buy furniture. Scott, this is pretty similar to the data we did share in the YouTube webinar where we focused on home improvement.
Yeah, and I've said I'm not going to be baited into making a statement that men are universally less willing to travel to purchase stuff, even if I think it's true. But it definitely appears to be true for furniture and home improvement products.
Okay, well, we're going to look specifically at the top and bottom tiers, those who are most willing and least willing to travel.
Yeah, and that's relevant because Facebook is pretty good at targeting by gender, among other things. So we're going to keep focused on those two who are willing to travel the most and the least. We also looked at these groups by household income. So here's the first one.
So for people not willing to travel more than 20 minutes, it looks like about 4/5 of that group makes $100,000 or less in household income.
Yeah, and now let's look at the household income of people willing to travel a further amount of time.
Yeah, so they make a lot more money. About half the group on the left are making more than $100,000 in household income.
And that brings us to our next fun trivia question. So we'd like to know if people think that more single people or married people are willing to travel more than 50 minutes to buy furniture. So it's coming up on your screen right now. So if you'd please participate, we'd appreciate it. Are more married or single people willing to travel longer distances and times to see furniture?
And Scott, I saw a couple of people in the Q&A box had indicated that they weren't seeing the where to answer the poll.
Yeah, you might want to scroll down in order to hit the submit button. That's probably going to be the best way to go about it.
Great.
Okay, and we're just going to give a few more seconds here. 5, 4, we got about 70% weighing in. 67% believe that married people will travel further for their amount of time, and 33% said that single people will travel further. Well, the people most likely to travel are more likely to be married. And I don't have a graphic for it, but the majority of those who are willing to travel further distances are generally 45 years old or older. So you can see there's a lot of data about your primary prospects just from doing simple polls and surveys like this, just by asking some questions.
So Scott, we're selling furniture to older, married, wealthier wives in this grouping.
Yeah, it appears so. Now, as I've said before, it's worth repeating, I think, that the type of research that we're doing is not expensive and it's fairly easy to do. But it's necessary to ask these travel questions at the local level rather than the national level like we actually did here.
Very good. So next we're going to get into how Facebook actually works with a little strategy thrown in. And we've decided to call this segment the setup because it's important to set up your campaigns for success. And we'll talk about how to do that. But it's also kind of double entendre because if you're not careful, you could actually get set up by Facebook, who wants to make it as easy for you to spend money with them as possible. As we put on registration page, it's really easy to spend too much money with Facebook. So while it might seem nice that Facebook makes it easy to spend money with them, we'd argue that what's easy may not necessarily be wise. And Edmund's going to explain a little more on that.
Right, but before I do, I just want to mention that we're going to start with the basics in this segment, but the Facebook tactics we're going to cover will get progressively more complex as we move through the webinar. Okay, so this is a fake business we set up on Facebook called Fred's Business. And we set this faux business up specifically for this webinar just to show really how simple it is. I mean, it's not even a real business, right? But Facebook makes it incredibly simple to start promoting it.
In fact, it's so simple that we decided we didn't need to go through the steps of showing everyone how to set up new business on Facebook.
Yeah, well, I mean, we think that probably everyone who registered for this webinar already has a company Facebook page. But look, if anyone wants help with this, please do let me know and I will personally help you get that done. You'll find my contact details at the end of the webinar. Anyway, the point of this image is that an hour after we created the account, Facebook reached out to us to start advertising. And they make it very, very easy with the Promote Now call to action button at the bottom.
I'm just going to say Facebook has also continued to reach out to us many times since we set this up, suggesting that we can attract new customers simply by pressing that Promote Now button.
Yeah.
Pretty
so let's move on to a real business on Facebook to show just how easy it is. So George's Sauce is a company that asks for our help in making more sales. If you haven't tried George's Sauce, you really should. It's fantastic. At any rate, they'd like to make sales both online and by driving sales into the stores where they're located. So if they wanted to promote their image online via Facebook, they could just hit that Promote Now call to action we saw just a moment ago, which you'll also see here. And like I said, Facebook makes it really easy to spend money with them. And when you press the button, it takes you to the following user-friendly page.
Yeah, this does look user-friendly.
Yep, Facebook is talking to everyone on this page. They don't waste time on marketing terms like call to action or conversions. They use simple, direct language like, get more website purchases and get more button clicks. And as I said, Facebook wants to make it as easy as possible for the new marketer or new business advertiser to spend money, right? I mean, compared to LinkedIn, YouTube, and others, this is a really, really easy, simple user interface.
Yeah, it's simple. It doesn't use a lot of marketing vernacular. And they do manage to offer plenty of options, from getting more website purchases to getting more visitors and clicks to promoting your business at the local level.
Yeah, but some of these options are arguably much better than others, right? So we thought we'd point some of those out because while it may be easy to promote your business on Facebook, it's also easy to waste money on Facebook. For instance, there may be a reason that a business would want to get more messages. But at RMI, we've never had any reason or desire to get more messages for our clients. And that's going to be true for any organization that just wants to make more sales online. We generally believe, at least for B2C businesses, that marketing is about selling stuff as efficiently as possible. Also, generally speaking, getting more leads is more of a B2B play, which we don't think Facebook is especially good at, as it's something, you'd want to nurture leads as opposed to selling something from your website. So getting more messages may be a handy long-term play, but we'd recommend choosing to either get more website purchases or promote the business locally, or just get more button clicks. But it's very important to note that as long as the button leads the consumer to a landing page where they're encouraged to buy something.
Well, if you were to choose get more button clicks right here, it would take you to another very user-friendly page, which we'll take a look at now.
Yeah. Facebook essentially builds the ad for you. which really is the definition of easy, right? You can use your own images from your library, which they save for you in the Facebook library, or you can use a relatively new feature that leverages free stock images to build your ad. Like I said, they make it very easy to start spending money with them.
And so then you fill in the text and it shows you how many characters you're allowed.
Yeah, they'll give you 90 characters to say what you want and about 25 characters for headlines. It should be noted, however, that you can also choose from videos, single images, or slideshows from this drop-down button here. Then you just need to hit the promote button and it pulls up a place for you to put in your credit card details. It's dangerously easy, right?
Yeah, it certainly does look very easy, like you said. But as we also said a minute ago, just because it's easy doesn't mean it's a wise thing to do.
Yes. Well, Facebook actually does have some valuable tools for targeting the ideal prospect if you know where to find them and how to use them. And don't get me wrong, the easy route may still create new customers. It just isn't likely to do so as cost effectively compared to doing a little bit of research first, like Scott covered, and then segmenting and targeting them, which is something Scott's about to cover when he talks about Facebook's audience insights in just a minute.
Okay, yeah, so we're going to cover that in a minute, but while we're still on the setup portion, let's briefly cover one strategy that a lot of people seem to overlook, and that's the use of a content calendar.
Okay, this is going to be a quick little strategy session here, but we think the content calendar is a bright idea, which is obviously the reason I put the light bulb there. Some retailers have a tendency to run ads at the same rate throughout the year. And I'm not saying that everybody does that or that most people do it, but I just thought I'd point out that they might increase it during Q4, during the gift giving season. And this image is how a basic content calendar might look for a furniture company planning to advertise its lamps on Facebook.
Well, of course, the real reason we used a light bulb there is that the lamp keeps with the furniture motif, Scott. So anyway, the thicker block in November and December is supposed to represent a larger advertising spend.
Yeah, and there are a lot of ways to represent it. I've seen them color coded. Some people put the actual planned advertising spend inside the bars and even the product's profit margins on the side, you know, in the margins. Like I said, this is a pretty basic example just to show how content calendars are supposed to work.
But I suppose more sophisticated marketers probably just don't spend the same amount all year, like this graph indicates for most of the year. Like they're more likely to look over their sales figures from previous years to see when there's greater demand, and by reviewing when they sold more product, they can manage their marketing based on previous sales.
Yeah, and that's a good idea, but using previous sales numbers can also carry with it some degree of confirmation bias. I mean, we typically see increased sales results because of increased advertising spend. So if we look at last year's sales, we're probably just going to see spikes in sales at the point where we thought was the right time to advertise.
And so rather than do that, we go straight to the consumer to find out when and what she prefers to buy.
Right, and that's what we're doing right now. All right, here's how we do that. GoogleTrends.com right here is showing the search volume for the keyword lamps. But you can put whatever search term you want in there. And you can choose whatever location and time frame you like. I mean, we chose all of the United States in the entire year of 2019, as you can see. But of course, you can make it more complex and search for lamps near me or lamps for sale or whatever search term you like. But we're keeping it simple, like I said, in this example.
And that tells us how interested people are in lamps based on their search query in the US in 2019. So let's take a look and see what it returned.
Yeah, so this is kind of a lot to take in, I know, but on the left is a pretty faint scale, 0 to 100, which is Google's search index points. And if you follow that blue line in the middle from left to right, you can see that search demand for the keyword lamp isn't as static as the content calendar image I shared. Also, there might be some nuggets to pull from this. For instance, some furniture retailers reduce their advertising right after the Christmas rush, because the demand for many big furniture items die off at the time. But some furniture items keep selling into the new year.
Well, it looks like this one was still being searched at 100 index points in January, but falls to its lowest point on the index at 68 at the end of April. Okay, so we also have an example of furniture that doesn't keep selling well after the gift giving season next.
Yeah, so we looked at grandfather clocks next, but the reason I wanted to show this slide from Google Trends is because of the drastic difference in search rates by state. You can see from the color-coded chart that there are definitely very different areas of greater and or lesser interest in grandfather clocks, depending specifically on the geography.
And again, this is for the entire United States and for all of last year, but you can actually pull data by state or region and as narrowly as the past 4 hours or the past 20 years. So if it's not a current tool that everyone's using, Google Trends might be worth checking out. Okay, and I think, Scott, you have one more example to share.
Right, and this is the last slide. It's going to be brief. You can see that searches for patio furniture are highest in Arizona and Florida, and the demand peaks in May, as you might imagine, beginning of summer. But if you were to look up Adirondack chairs, they're much more popular in the Northeast, and rocking chairs are searched mostly in the Southeast, especially Wilmington, North Carolina, for whatever reason. They're all sort of the same type of furniture, but they're slightly different. And you just need to know how to choose the right keywords when you're selling.
But the point of sharing this search volume and search location was to talk about content calendars.
Right. Well, the thing is that it's very useful to know when and where you have the most search volume for a particular search term. And you can do that for free going to googletrends.com and typing in whatever search term you want. And this is obviously a very basic fictional example of how a content calendar might be laid out for some area in the Southeast. But you can get an idea of how looking at demand first might enable you not only to manage your marketing budget expectations, but also to back into what creative needs you'll have, what landing pages you're going to have created to have in place, and other things that are related to setting up a marketing campaign.
Well, but also how much you spend on advertising for each product should factor into how much competition and margin you have on those products. And I would think that looking from it, from this 30,000 foot view enables you to consider what your ROI should be at the product level.
Right. In fact, I think looking at it in this way sort of forces you to do exactly that.
Okay, this is a good strategy segment here, but now we're going to get into the more tactical stuff. And that takes us to Facebook's Audience Insights, which Scott has a quick way to highlight.
Yeah, well, we usually use screen grabs to showcase important tools and data and analyses, but well, it's just easier to do in a webinar format. But the Audience Insights is an interactive tool that we wanted everyone to actually see how it works, because not everybody's using it. So I made a short video of me walking through it.
Okay, let's jump to that.
Okay, hey guys, we are now inside of Audience Insights, as you can see here. They start us off inside United States, so we're just going to keep it like that for now. Let me just point out, you can go here to create new, and they will offer everyone on Facebook or just people that we're connected to. So we're going to take this because we're trying to advertise to people who fit our criteria. Now, notice that a little more than half of the people on Facebook are women, a little less than half are men, and they've got it categorized by age here. You've got 12% of the women who are ages 18 to 24, and 23% of the women are 25 to 34, 27% of the men are 25 to 34, and so on. You can see how it goes. But we learned early on in this webinar that women are more willing to travel longer distances to see furniture. So if we wanted to have a campaign that reached out with local intent, then we could go here. And so you may recall that women who were ages 45 and higher were actually more likely to travel and spend more money. Okay, so now we've chosen the age, and we can go and choose women here, and that narrows it down to this group of people. Now, if we also knew that married women are more likely to buy higher end furniture, we're building a campaign right now. Just by clicking on this, we've got there. And the education level, if we knew that the education level from our research indicated that a college degree or higher are likely to buy higher end furniture, well, we've already really done a good job of narrowing the field. And you can see also we can choose from job title and other things here, from market segments and you know, whether they're parents of newborns or you know, parents in general. So, you know, politics, we actually get this from the research that we do. We know if people are conservative, progressive, or what have you. And so there are a lot of things to choose here. If you do your research, you can actually build a really nice segmented group. But again, if we're doing the women who are more likely to travel, then we don't want to keep it on the entire United States, do we? What we could do is just, you know, we could focus here where I am in Roswell, Georgia. Okay. And then, okay, so that brings us down to 6,000 to 7,000 people. That's a big difference. And we could include Sandy Springs, which is right down the road from here in Georgia. And then maybe we'll go to Peachtree Corners in Georgia. And that's right around the corner too. So now we've got 10 to 15,000 people who are women, ages 45 and higher, who are married, who have a college degree. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, you can actually go to the interests here. Facebook does a really good job of understanding who likes what, and that's because they're liking a lot of stuff on Facebook. And so if you go down to, let's see, home and garden, and you really just have to sort of figure this out by moving around and understanding the different segments that they have. There's furniture right there. So you can choose furniture. You can go back down, and if you're interested, if this is part of your company's appeal, maybe you've got home improvement. Okay, so now we're back down to 6,000 to 7,000 people who fit these criteria. What we're doing here is we're building very narrow segments that we can really focus in our attention on. Build different types of ads for these people. It's a different webinar, but it's a really good message to understand that if you target this way and then you figure out what messages resonate most with them, you're going to have a much bigger impact and a much more effective and efficient use of your marketing budget.
Well, I think that certainly does demonstrate the power of Facebook's audience insights. And I'm sure everyone can see how and why you could use that method to much more narrowly focus at the local level. And I don't think you mentioned it, but I think you're referring to Facebook's saved audiences, which are very much driven from the demonstration you just gave. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah, that's right. Immediately after I saved that particular audience, then it became what Facebook calls a saved audience, which we'll talk about more.
But can you also use audience insights to sell to a much larger geographic footprint?
Yeah, I mean, we focused on local there because it follows the data we pulled from the research segment we call Know Your Customer. But the flip side of that equation is that men would prefer to buy a lot of types of furniture online. At the product level, you really should understand that. So for instance, if we're a furniture store, we could pull that data back up, hone in specifically on people who prefer to purchase sofas and mattresses online. You know, we'd dig into what they look like and build segments specifically for them, leaving the geographic reach to the entire US because you're selling online. And of course, we've only touched the surface with that 5-minute video, however long it was, but you know, different products have different types of customers. It's just really important to know what your customers look like so that you can target them more precisely.
Okay, well, in the next section, Evelyn's actually going to talk about how Facebook enables everyone to figure out what their customers look like by analyzing what people who purchase from you look like based on their Facebook profiles. That's a section about Facebook's ad manager. And as you can probably tell, it gets more complex as we move through it. But before we dive into that, now's the time that we said we'd have Scott's 2-minute commercial about who RMI is and what we do. So Scott, take it away.
Okay, hey.
Yes, thank you. For those who may have joined a little late, this is just like a commercial break to tell everybody who we are and what we do, which is, of course, the point of a commercial, I guess. Anyway, it should just take a couple of minutes. And so one way to explain what we do is to start by saying what we don't do, and that's brand marketing. We don't do brand marketing because we couldn't possibly pass the red face test in proving that it works. So as we said before, we're direct response marketers, and that means that everything has to be tied to the metrics that our clients are asking for. So we put a plan together ahead of our execution of the plan, and then tell them what to expect and what we'll deliver. And the thing is, we don't think marketing is supposed to be about guesswork, at least not anymore. It's more like a math problem. We think everyone should just market with confidence. And when we have initially met with new clients, we've heard a lot of things. I mean, a lot of horror stories about, how they've gotten burned by Madison Avenue creative agencies, or they don't know where their customers are actually coming from. And these are really smart people who just want to have a firm grip on where they can get the most efficient use of their marketing budget. They just want to know how their competitors are doing and what will influence their best prospects to become their best customers. And that's what we do. Oh, and by the way, we're offering a free competitive audit, which is along the lines of what I just talked about, to anyone who fills out the feedback form at the end of the webinar. So please do take the time to fill out that very short survey at the end of this just to give us a grade, tell us how we did. Anyway, we pride ourselves in taking the guesswork out of what works to get the absolute best use of your marketing budget. And we do that so that everyone can market with confidence. And okay, so that was what we do. And now I just want to say who we are. We actually have 7 guiding principles at RMI that are painted in giant letters on the wall next to our large front door. And it starts with a commitment to strive for excellence. But then, of course, everybody's gonna say that. So the other 6 principles we live by are in place to create a design to ensure we strive for excellence in order to ensure we're doing what we say we're gonna do. So, first of all, we recognize performance and we encourage innovation, and each of us vows to respect one another and not to take advantage of others. And although we do have legal contracts in place, we believe we can represent each of these principles because our word is our bond. And that at the center of it all here, and really the cornerstone holding it all together, I think, is that we make a concerted effort to always be grateful. And I can honestly say that I love what I do at RMI. And I feel very fortunate that I worked, for many years at a couple of Fortune 500 companies, which I suppose could be part of the reason why I'm grateful, like my colleagues. Anyway, that's who we are, and that is the halftime break.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think that's a really accurate description of who we are and what we do at RMI. So thanks again for that. And if anyone who's listening in today are interested in getting to know us better, please let us know. So Scott covered off on how to create saved audiences inside Audience Insights. And now Edmund is going to help us understand some of the background behind not only how to set up a thoroughly segmented campaign on Facebook, but also how to create what's known as a customized audience in Facebook's ad manager.
Right. Well, Facebook's ad manager starts with the same general high-level campaign objectives as we saw in the previous section I covered. The biggest difference between the easy version and this one is that this one includes what Karen might refer to as the marketing vernacular, where they're now using terms such as conversions and brand awareness. And you can see here that Facebook has broken up these groups into 3 campaign objective categories. So awareness, consideration, and conversion. And you can see that when you choose one of these options, as we did here, they provide a description for what it means.
So do you ever use the brand awareness campaigns?
Well, like Scott alluded to a minute ago, we believe in making sales and marketing that has metrics and a strong ROI component. And essentially, that's what direct response marketing means, right? That ROI component is much more difficult to prove in a situation where you have a brand awareness campaign. I mean, look, I'm sure everyone listening appreciates just how difficult it is to measure awareness. At RMI, we consider brand awareness and ad reach to be more of a vanity metric nowadays, because ultimately, digital marketing gives you the ability to precisely track results, which is why we generally stay away from branding campaigns online.
Well, the next campaign objective is consideration, which includes traffic and app installs and lead generation. And the definition Facebook gives is that it's meant to send traffic to your website. So would you suggest this group of objectives?
Well, we're getting closer here, but traffic really isn't a strong enough metric. I mean, sure, you want to send them to your website, but, and especially if you're a B2C organization, we definitely want to send that Facebook user to a landing page with a compelling form to purchase, or at least take that first step in making a purchase. Another example in this consideration group is the video views category. And that can be sort of dangerous, especially if you're sending the viewer to YouTube, where they have commercials and videos playing one after the other. The result of that is that, you risk losing the attention of the person you're trying to engage with.
So something like app installs and lead generation wouldn't really be of interest.
I'm not saying we wouldn't use those. In fact, lead generation is a very powerful objective for B2B campaigns because it's typically a longer sale. And don't get me wrong, we've also had app installment campaigns driving patients to download a telehealth app. And that was great, but while it's not exactly sales, at least in the strictest sense of the word, it is more in line with the definition of a sales conversion.
Speaking of, here's how Facebook defines conversions.
Yes, now this column is a pretty safe place to be when using Facebook's Ads Manager, and mostly where we live here at RMI. Again, we've had app install campaigns, and we also work with B2B organizations where lead gen is important because ultimately, you're not likely to have a large enterprise level sale online with a B2B lead. Also, lead gen is a pretty good way to gather leads within Facebook so you don't actually have to leave the site. Anyway, the more interesting component of setting the campaign objective is the campaign budget optimization, or CBO, in Ads Manager.
And here's the campaign budget optimization page, or CBO.
Right. Well, the first tip here is to make sure it's toggled on. If you do, it'll show the following options.
Okay, and now we're getting into the bid strategy portion of the webinar. But just remember, not all of these options are available for each of the campaign objectives we just went over.
Right. For instance, if for some reason you wanted to choose reach as your campaign objective, meaning you just want your ad to be seen by as many people as possible, Facebook would only give you the choice of lowest cost and bid cap.
Okay, so and then just so we're on the same page, can we quickly go over the difference between those two bid strategies?
Sure. So the lowest cost prioritizes getting you as many ad placements as possible at the lowest cost. And that's a good thing, especially for businesses on a tight budget, because you'll reach all of the lowest cost opportunities within the budget parameters you set. It's pretty hands-off, and Facebook manages that bidding for you. Those are the positives. Now, Facebook will tell you that the negatives are that there's not much in the way of cost control, but we would argue that this is even more of a reason to ensure that you have tight targeting. Probably everyone listening in knows that when building your audience, Facebook has that little meter that shows you if your audience is too broad or too specific. But what Facebook might consider to be too narrow, we wouldn't necessarily think to be true. And that's because we wouldn't only rely on Facebook's algorithms per se to dictate what our ideal audience should be. Facebook will tell you that your audience is too narrow, but we'd say that having a number of very narrowly focused audiences are much, much better than trying to reach too broad of an audience with a single campaign.
Okay, so how about bid cap? How is that different?
I think the concept of a bid cap became popular when eBay rolled out their online bidding in the mid-90s. So, a bid cap is what you're willing to pay, but it's not necessarily the full amount of what you'd pay. It's what you're willing to pay per conversion, but you'll actually only pay a penny over what the next highest bidder would pay.
So in other words, if there are, say, like 4 bidders bidding for 3 spots, and one of them bids 30 cents, 2 of them bid 50 cents, and the last one bids $10, the guy that put the bid in for $10 is likely to win the bid and only pay 51 cents, which is that penny over the next highest bid.
Right. Also, bid cap is the only pricing strategy where the advertiser sets the bid rather than Facebook.
Yeah, and I suspect the incentive for Facebook to provide this bidding system is because there are very likely plenty of $10 bidders out there who think they're going to game the system and outbid the 50-cent bidders, which will artificially elevate the bid prices.
That is the thinking, yes. But the truth is, we believe, people should use this bid strategy, so long as they have calculated how much a conversion is worth to them. We've talked about how RMI is a metrics-driven company, so we track everything, and you really need to track your sales activity over time to achieve this. Going back to Scott's furniture example, if you narrowly target and know that women over the age of 45 in a particular area of town will spend on average, let's say $482, and that 1 in 10 Facebook ads will convert to a sale, then you only need to back out of your margin, to know how much each particular ad click is worth to you.
So if you make that number your ceiling or the amount you're willing to pay for a bid, then when you pay less, it's all gravy. But Scott's example was for in-person sales where women were willing to drive to the store to buy the furniture. So how could Facebook possibly know who visited the store?
Well, that's a fair point. Facebook wouldn't know that, but you can track it through Google Analytics and their relatively new store visits. So they track people via their phones into the store after they've clicked on a Facebook ad or any other ad for that matter. But that's a topic for another webinar.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in seeing that webinar, let us know. We can walk you through how to turn on Google store visits. Okay, let's get back to the other bid strategies and we move on to cost cap.
So cost cap is just like it sounds. You put it in place when you need to keep costs within a specific threshold without manually adjusting your bids. We don't cost cap because honestly, it seems kind of lazy to us. I mean, if you're capping your costs, Facebook might argue that it's a safe way to ensure you don't overspend, but we think it's actually less safe for reasons, I'll talk about on the next slide. In fact, in order to talk about bid cap and target cost, we're going to look at how Facebook positions the difference between the three strategies. Now, this is straight from Facebook, and it's how they explain the various bidding strategies in their business strategy guide. Here's the bid cap, which we don't hate. It's not perfect, but it's not bad either. Let's compare it to the other cost cap. You see that difference? If you know exactly how much your leads are worth, as we mentioned earlier, why would you ever consider using a cost cap?
Yeah, you wouldn't. It just seems to be a way to ensure you don't run over the marketing budget that your boss might have given you.
Well, that's one way to put it, sure. And it takes work to figure out what the average worth of a new lead is. But as we've said many times before, not all leads are worth the same. You can build segments for very detailed personas who buy from you, and you can also have a very good understanding of what those leads are worth to you. Now let's take a look at target costs. So if it's true that bid cap is better than cost cap, then target cost is just the worst version of cost cap, starting with the higher cost from the start.
And we're going to get back to the CBO sheet very quickly to finish off with the minimum ROAS.
So this is a relatively new budget qualifier in the CBO. ROAS is more of that marketing vernacular. It's a pretty familiar term within marketing types, and it's an acronym that stands for return on ad spend. Obviously, you want your return to be maximal, not minimal. So the term minimum ROAS did seem a little weird to us at first. But Facebook has said that their interpretation is kind of like the bid cap concept. In other words, Facebook works to achieve the minimum return that you would be happy with. So instead of setting the ceiling like you do with a bid cap, you're really setting the floor with a ROAS.
So Evan, why is minimum ROAS grayed out in our example here? It looks like it's supposed to be a choice, but it isn't.
Well, that's because in our example, we're trying to drive in-store sales. And as we said a minute ago, Facebook doesn't actually know if people bought your product from the store. They can tell you if you bought online or from your Facebook store, or if you have pixels set up on your website to help Facebook understand that they bought from your website. ROAS wouldn't be possible without pixels in place on your website.
And I think this is an important concept. Scott was talking earlier about saved audiences. If you are selling online, then you would be able to take advantage of this ROAS feature.
Right. Well, if you're selling online, you will be able to see how your saved audiences are performing. And the more narrowly you create those campaigns, the better you know how well specific audiences and specific types of people are performing. Then Facebook can also create lookalike audiences where Facebook essentially matches people with similar demographics, interests, and behaviors to your best performing saved audiences. And we think these customized audiences are a pretty beneficial development in Facebook's marketing tools.
Okay, let's take a look at customized audiences page.
Okay, so here's Facebook's customized audience page, where you can choose from either your sources or Facebook sources.
So on the page we're looking at right now, it seems to be that customer list is hovered over with the pointer at the time of the screen grab.
Right, and you can see Facebook attempts to define what each of these are on the side. At the end of that definition, you'll notice that Facebook is sure, I mean, look, at least now they're pretty sure to explain that although you can still upload your own customer list, it's still anonymized. And that means that the privacy of the people's identities that you upload should be protected.
So you said they can still upload customer lists. I guess that's because of the legal trouble Facebook was in a couple of years ago for sharing people's data, back when Mark Zuckerberg had to appear in front of Congress.
Yep, that's what I meant. This customer list used to actually be a much more powerful tool for marketers because you could upload a list of absolutely your best customers and Facebook would tell you all about them. Not only their behaviors and interests within Facebook, but also third-party data that they purchase, such as their income levels.
Yeah, so I can see why that would be considered a no-no. But how about the source next to it, websites?
It's also a really powerful tool. It's how Facebook can begin to calculate your return on ad spend. But again, this is where you need your pixels set up on your website to ensure that you're tracking what consumers do once they get to your website.
So in other words, you could have a Facebook pixel on a thank you page when someone completes a checkout. And that way Facebook knows that they've purchased something on your website and can add it to their calculations.
Exactly. And again, those are all your own sources, but you can also use Facebook sources. So if you value video views or what Facebook calls, an event on Facebook, you can have pixels set up for that. It's probably obvious that we would say that shopping and the lead form are two of the more important Facebook sources that you'd want to track.
Okay, this is all really good stuff. But on the last slide, you mentioned lookalike audiences. Can you explain what those are?
Yeah. So here's a page where we've created customized audiences, and those are highlighted on the screen right now. Well, if any of these audiences perform particularly well, we can ask Facebook to find another audience that looks just like this one. For instance, look at our retargeting audience here. It's a custom audience we created of 5,000 people who've taken certain actions on our website over the last 60 days. We like the behaviors they've shown on our website, so we asked Facebook to go out and build us a list of prospects on Facebook who look like this audience.
So the one above it is the lookalike audience, but it looks like it's considerably larger group.
Right. Well, Facebook will actually allow you to choose 1 to 10% of the population you're targeting. So in this example, that population is the United States.
Yeah, this is a lot to take in, and it might seem overwhelming to some since a lot of this relies on setting up pixels on your website to track people's behavior.
Yeah, well, like I said, Facebook wants to make it as easy as possible to spend money with them. No shock there. So they've also created a pixel helper.
Of course they have.
We don't, so look, we don't have time to go over all of that now, but here's a sneak peek of what it looks like. As we've said many times before, Facebook is all too willing to enable you to spend money with them. And one way to do that is to ensure that you have pixels set up on your website. It's actually not as difficult as most people think, and it really does provide the ability to have far better tracking, enabling you to know what marketing is working and what needs to be worked on.
Okay, well, maybe we can revisit this topic with a Facebook 201 session of this webinar, but we really need to start wrapping up. And I think there are a couple of things Scott wanted to mention before we put up the feedback form. Oh, and if you do fill out the feedback form in just a minute, there's also a spot where you can sign up for a free competitive audit, which again, we're offering for free for just giving us feedback. But I think Scott wants to mention a couple of projects that are tied to today's webinar and he thought you might be interested in.
Right. Well, I wanted to start with audience segmentation and insights. This is a project-based program that we have. This one that is really near and dear to my heart. This type of data analysis is what I have personally been doing for many years. And I don't mind telling you that I really geek out over this, discovery of who the best prospects are and segmenting them and targeting to them. So we've seen it gives such a massive advantage to people who understand it because of the ability to target so tightly today with these digital platforms. So you're able to spend your marketing budget much more efficiently and track every dollar you spend. And then the other one I wanted to mention is the social media assessment. Obviously, we talked a lot about how huge Facebook and YouTube and others are, and they enable you to segment and target at a finer degree than ever before. If you don't think you're getting the most from your social media platforms, we can definitely help you, and we can take a look and provide this assessment for you. And then finally, this is the free offer for filling out the feedback form. So at the end of that form, just tell us if you'd be interested in taking advantage of the free competitive audit.
And as Scott just said, we'd really appreciate it if you could just answer the questions on your screen. It's kind of the time to give us a grade. And we are really, really looking for honest feedback. We're going to leave the feedback form up for everyone to answer, but also want to tell you about a blog you might consider subscribing to. So Good Fat, is that coming up now? There it is. Good Fat ROI is a blog created by Ken Robbins, who is the CEO here at RMI. He updates his blog all the time. It's got fantastic content and great ideas. It has something of a health focus, but it's just generally helpful marketing tips. So I hope you'll take note of it and subscribe to it. I think you'll find it very, very useful. And last slide, if you have any questions about something we've talked about today or anything else for that matter, feel free to send an email to Edmund.
Yes, please do. And, just to circle back to who we are at Response to Mind Health have a focus on healthcare marketing. So if you'd like help figuring out how to do some or all of what we covered today, please reach out to us. That's me on the screen.
And I think that's everything for today.
Well, wait, if you fill out the feedback form and would like a competitive audit, go ahead and send Edmund the 3 websites, the URLs that you'd like us to compare and contrast against your website.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, our guys have been known to cater the competitive audit to the organizations who request them. So please send me the 3 website URLs you want to be compared to, in addition to the 3 key challenges your organization faces, and anything else you might want us to know, such as whether you're more interested in paid search or social or your website's SEO status.
Okay, that should do it. We've finished you 2 minutes before the hour. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Bye,
We're
everyone.
we're going to leave that feedback form up in case there's anybody who hasn't filled it out yet. Thanks
Great.
again, and bye.
Bye.